I'm Jim Young, a DoD manager on Google's federal team, based here locally. As some of you know, over the past 10 years, Google has welcomed a diverse group of speakers to our offices all around the world. These meetings are intended to help stimulate thought, creativity, discussion, and debate about topics of interest. Our office in Mountain View has hosted scientists, chefs, musicians, authors, and both President Obama and Senator McCain, just to name a few of our guests. Over the past year, we've tried to bring that spirit of discussion and debate here to Washington with our series of Google D.C. talks, which are open to the entire Washington community. Today's Google D.C. talk will look at the ways the military and the intelligence community are using Web 2.0 tools to share knowledge quickly across their operations and make intelligence assessments. As you may have heard this week, Web 2.0 is officially the 1 millionth word in the English dictionary. Today's DC talk, we're going to look through the video sharing tools, social networking sites, blogs, wikis, mashups, and more. Web 2.0 has led to the development and evolution of countless web-based communities. These tools have allowed anyone with an internet connection to share and discover information with millions of users across the globe. Some would even say close to 1 billion now, all in real time. The benefits of Web 2.0 are being used to further national security, and you may be surprised to learn the ways in which it's being used currently and may be used in the future. Soldiers in Iraq used a tool called CavNet, an interactive community hosted on the military secure intranet to share knowledge acquired while on patrol. The intelligence community has adopted wikis, blogs, and other Web 2.0 tools to organize and share information. Intellipedia, a classified wiki aimed at helping analysts share intelligence, is used by tens of thousands of individuals from the 16 intelligence agencies and other national security-related organizations. We're lucky to be able to welcome a distinguished panel to my left that has been working on these issues for some time. I'm going to ask several questions, and I encourage our panel to ask questions of one another. We also want you, the audience, to be active participants in this discussion. There are microphones in the aisles, and if you have questions, please line up behind them. We'll also take some questions from Google Moderator, which is the online interactive discussion forum. And I'd also like to mention that this is being taped for YouTube. With that, I'd like to introduce our panel. To my immediate left, we have Colonel Michaelis of the U.S. Army. He currently serves as Special Assistant to the Vice Chief of Staff, Army. He received his BA in History from Texas A&M University and MPA from Harvard Kennedy School of Government. He served multiple tours in Iraq under various command and staff positions and served as an assistant professor at West Point. His next assignment will be to command Cavalry and Stryker Brigade?
Cavalry Squadron, yeah.
Thank you, sir. To his immediate left is Dr. Calvin Andrus, Innovation Officer at the CIA. Dr. Andrus is a 26-year veteran of the CIA, having worked as a regional political analyst during the Cold War, an IT project manager before 9/11, an enterprise application architect after 9/11, and now serves as an innovation officer. His recent work has been on virtual worlds and mixed reality. Look forward to hearing more about that. We invited him here today because he is author of the award-winning paper, The Wiki and the Blog, Toward a Complex Adaptive Intelligence Community. To his left, finally, we have Sean Dennehy, Intellipedia and Enterprise 2.0 evangelist at the CIA. Sean Dennehy has more than 15 years of experience in various elements of the U.S. intelligence community. He is the founder of Intellipedia, an online system for collaborative data sharing used by the intelligence community. So with that, I'd like to begin with having each of the panelists start a short open discussion about things that they've been looking at and things that they're interested in, followed by a question period where I'm going to pose questions to them directly and through Google Moderator and then later from the audience. So with that, Colonel, I'd like you to start off and let us know a little bit more about CavNet and how it came about and things that you've learned and how it was used.
Well, Jim, I appreciate the invitation to come here and to sit on a board with two distinguished gentlemen. Really kind of put you underneath the limelight here. Just truth in lending. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Patrick Macayos. I have not dealt with CavNet in a few years because the concepts behind CavNet have been absorbed into the way the Army does business today. Something else, I am in the Army, and as a result of that, our language happens to be PowerPoint. So I've got a couple slides today that I'd like to show you. We can't break from that for some reason, but it'll give you kind of a flavor behind what we were thinking in late 2003, 2004, and then the execution in 2004, 2005 of CavNet, and then what we ended up doing later, taking the lessons of a tour in combat in OIF-2 in 2004, 2005, and then applied it to a rotation in October 2006 to January 2008 during the period of the surge itself. The idea behind CavNet formed from a conversation that I had with the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division at the time in leveraging the ideas behind communities of practice. Two primary communities of practice that were being used in the Army at the time were companycommand.com and platoonleader.org. And they were designed to connect platoon leaders and company commanders in a conversation about leadership at the company level. So much of my discussion will be at the tactical level today. The idea behind taking that idea and also what I was teaching at West Point at the time, which was organizational change, it felt to me that there was a much more powerful result that you could get from this idea of applying a community of practice to a tactical environment. And we called that a knowledge transfer system. Next slide. There were 4 ideas around that formed the idea of CavNet itself. The first was the idea that you could transfer experiences for competitive advantage. And the purpose behind CavNet itself is to harness emerging tactics, techniques, and procedures, both enemy and friendly, to create a competitive advantage against that adversary itself. As an instructor at West Point, I would email my students that had become lieutenants, and one of them happened to be on the Afghan-Pakistan border serving there. And it was a 2-line email, hey, how's it going out there? And within about 3 hours, must have been a 4-page email that came back to me. Just a brain dump of everything that he was learning in the field itself. And one particular thing stuck out. He said, sir, we are really getting hit pretty bad with ambushes from the IEDs that are out there right now. You know, what we figured out about the enemy, lesson learned about the enemy tactic, is that they're using a spotter. They're timing the time it takes our first vehicle to move between 2 points and using that to hit the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th vehicle. Lesson learned. The second thing that he said in the email was, well, we figured out a counter tactic. What we figured out is that as we move in these patrols, we need to vary the distance and the speed between the different vehicles that are moving between us. Now, I come from the old Army, and we understand march distances, and we understand that there is a timeline that you have to get from point A to point B, and you don't violate that. But what he just did in that simple email was reframe my entire idea of how to fight in Afghanistan, and we took it to Iraq with us too. What if that young lieutenant had the capability to take that one lesson and extend it to everyone across the battle space along the Afghan-Pakistan border, and they all rolled out the next day? That's the idea behind knowledge transfer in the top left, that you can move into a situation armed with the experiences of your predecessors or armed with the experiences of what's happening on the ground right now. The second was this idea of we could do it faster than the enemy. And this comes from the top right of John Boyd's OODA loop, the orient, observe, orient, decide, and act, this idea that you can turn faster than your adversary. If you can turn faster than your adversary, then you get inside his ability to orient, causing disorientation, uncertainty, and you create advantage. John Boyd was an Air Force colonel who had trained fighter pilots in the late 1960s. In the 1970s, he helped design the F-16, advocating for a higher thrust-to-weight ratio. That thrust-to-weight ratio allows you to turn inside the capability of your adversary. And he took that same idea and applied it to organizations in the way we fight. Same design here. How do you create that ability to turn inside your adversary? The third idea was this comparison between the organizational structures that we have out there of our adversaries and ourselves. And that's at the bottom left. Our adversaries are networked, flat, at least at the time that's what we thought. and their ability to move information and data and knowledge rapidly was a hell of a lot better than we were. And you compare it to ourselves, when it comes to information and data, I don't think there's any organization on the face of the planet that can transfer a significant activity, one IED going off at grid, whatever, faster than anyone else in the world. But what we don't do a very good job of is transferring the knowledge from that set of data points. So not an IED that went off at a particular grid, but how that IED was emplaced, how we found the IED, what was the methodology to disarm the IED itself. In essence, we're still culturally a hierarchy when it comes to transferring knowledge as opposed to information and data. There's a filtering mechanism, go to the next highest level, go to the next highest level, go to the next highest level. Eventually it comes out in some report. You're 30 days behind the enemy. They've already adapted 3, 4, 5 times from the way you're doing business. In fact, what we were seeing is an adaptation of the enemy in Iraq in 2004, 2005 on a 3-day cycle. And we were adapting in probably a 30-day cycle at the time. And the last idea is that the Army is very good at conducting the after-action review. We are very critical of ourselves. We do an operation, we come back and ask some fundamental questions. What was the mission? What happened? Why did it happen? And then the last piece, the knowledge, is what are we going to do about it the next time? Or what are we going to do better next time? Normally it's rolled back into the same organization, into the same squad, to the same platoon, to the same company. What it doesn't do is diffuse out. That little kernel, that bit of knowledge there that came out of that AAR could possibly have benefit to every other like organization across the division's battle space, which was Baghdad at the time, 7 million people, 256 square miles. And that whoever got that information, data, knowledge, could adapt, adopt, or discard it. Those were the 4 kind of big ideas behind Cabinet itself, and it manifests itself into what looked like, next slide, this up here. It is nothing more than a messaging board. That's it. Ask me how much it costs. It cost me $2,500 to purchase this software. Why $2,500? Because that's the maximum I could spend on a credit card purchase as a United States Army officer. That was it. But we spent about $2.5 million in Baghdad in connecting this down to every company commander within Baghdad itself. I went in with kind of 3 assumptions. First assumption was that the enemy was turning faster than we were. The second was we were existing in a relatively stable environment. And the third was that I only needed to get this down to the battalion level, group of about 600 people. I was right in the first 2. I was wrong in the last assumption. It really needed to get down to the user, to where they live and work. I use the analogy. It would really be painful for me to walk into my boss's office and say, hey, boss, can I use your computer? It just doesn't work that way. But it rides on the secret internet, intranet, SIPRnet, that we use right now, that we've used. So one of the functionalities we kind of programmed into this on top of the $2,500 program was an alert functionality. I looked at this different from a community practice to a knowledge transfer system that you needed to complement, not complicate a company commander's life. It was oriented around the 220 company commanders we had serving in Baghdad at the time. What I found was the users exploded. I think it was something like 8,000 people by the time we got done, with about 100,000 hits a month, infinitesimal when you look at it in terms of the internet, but it was big at the time in terms of the SIPRnet, oriented on 3 kind of circles of people: the original 220 company commanders, the incoming unit as a relief in place tool, and then the greater Army itself to harvest the lessons from that into doctrine, into tactics, or whatever we were going to do next with it. The alert functionality allowed an immediate push, and that's kind of where it ended up at. Now, we had 2 other systems in play. It was embedded in the web portal of the 1st Cavalry Division with every significant activity, information and data that came out of the field. And then that was used in construct with a command and control system called Command Post of the Future. It was a geospatial-based system that allowed collaborative interplay between commanders in order to coordinate efforts and to do some analysis. As we came out of OIF-2, Operation Iraqi Freedom 2, and started thinking about the lessons from that and looking at what was happening out there in the bleeding edges of technology, we went to DARPA and asked them to help us create a squad level, a patrol level, the lowest tactical level system that would be able to arm our young E6s, our sergeants and corporals who are out there leading patrols every day. And we came up with a kind of a collusion of these three ideas to form something called Tiger. Next slide. Tiger was an idea in 2005, created with the assistance of DARPA. A very eloquent lady over at DARPA took the program management of this. Her name is Mary Maeda, who worked hand in hand with my brigade. At the time, I had moved from the division down to the brigade, and put the programmers next to the sergeants that were going over to theater and created and I hate to say it, an almost Google-like functionality. Maybe I don't hate to say it. Because that's what they know. That's what these young, bright sergeants and officers we have coming to us today know no different than the technology that's out there today, and they're comfortable operating in it. How do you create a system that complements their ability, that can sift, slice, and dice through massive amounts of information and data, and create for them what I refer to as a virtual notebook. I went to 15 months of combat and came back with 7 notebooks like this. You know, all the resident knowledge that's in there. It's just amazing. Most of them are little notes of, you know, write this memo or write that. But there's some other good stuff in there, I swear. But our young sergeants have built this stuff over time. Can we put this into a virtual notebook type of environment where they can attach media? They all got cameras out there where they can attach bats and hides data, which is biometric data, where they can do some analysis of routes. So literally, I can draw now. Our young squad leaders can create the intelligence preparation they need to conduct their operations. You can draw an area or a line, and within a time horizon, you know, the last 6 hours, last 6 years, I can do an analysis of the data around there. I can, if I want to look at all the IEDs and all the small arms fires and all the incidents from a combat perspective that have happened to me, I can slice and dice through that information and know when, in a period of time, the most likely time I'm going to get hit, or that the IEDs will be in place, and I can adjust my timeline, get inside that decision cycle, and beat the enemy at their own game and start to whittle away at the network itself. We started out with 1 brigade. It's right now fielded to 15 brigades. Every brigade in Iraq and Afghanistan have it today. The troops love it. The design behind it is that the company is right next to the soldiers every day. What we found is this repository helps the next unit come in because it can tap into the notebooks of everybody else and build their picture, their analysis of what's going on. And a funny thing happened. In 2007, during the surge, if you can go to the next slide, what we found was in early January, and this is only a snapshot between September and November of 2007, in early January, in my brigade's operations, we were getting hit at its height, 168 times a week. That's by all forms of enemy contact. It's the IEDs, it's the RPGs, it's the mortars, it's small arms fire, any other permutation of those. As the impacts of the surge started to reveal itself and manifest itself across the battle space, we found our significant activities dropping, but our need for non-kinetic information requirements grow exponentially. We were now able to engage the populace. We were able to conduct census data. We were able to understand the businesses and the economic drivers of the local areas that we were in itself. And this resident knowledge helped build the picture. So as the Army converts itself to a full spectrum force, and we understand that stability operations and civil operations are the equivalent of offense and defensive operations, our information requirements go up. And the need to create knowledge out of that information and data is more important today than it's ever been before. And I think at that I'll go ahead and start. Well, there's one more slide. It just kind of highlights something. It was written in 1953. Again, I talk in PowerPoint slides. Written in 1953 by a guy named SLA Marshall, who wrote a book called Men Against Fire, a prolific writer. And he had a very simple statement that I tapped into early in 2004, and you can see it right there. A good company and idea is likely to remain confined to one company indefinitely. Why? Not because you know they want to hoard the data and information. They just don't know that everyone else has got the same problem you do. So how do you solve that? And that's what I've been doing for the last few years. Sir.
Calvin, several years ago, you wrote a paper called The Wiki and the Blog, in which you outlined ways the intelligence community could adapt a real-time, worldwide decision and implementation environment. Can you explain your thinking behind this paper and how it came to be and how it manifested itself to today's environment?
Okay, thank you. And thank you for inviting me to come here today. The paper is available on the web at ssrn.org if any are interested in looking there, or you can just Google Calvin Andrus Wiki blog and it'll be the first one. Next slide. So this is a map of the Battle of New Orleans. I see some active duty officers. I don't want them to answer the question, but can anybody else tell me why the Battle of New Orleans is significant in U.S. military history? Yes, please. Right. They fought the battle after the war was over. Who, in their right mind, but Andrew Jackson, would fight a battle after the war was over? So why did he fight the battle after the war was over? He didn't know, right? He didn't know the war was over. Why not? They negotiated the peace in Paris, right? They had to write that down on a piece of paper, put it on a boat. The boat had to go across the Atlantic. When it got here, they had to duplicate it. They didn't sort of really know where he was, right? So they put it on many horsebacks, right, and rode all over the country with these pieces of paper. Finally got to him down in New Orleans when he's still celebrating 2 weeks later, actually longer than that, and finally told him, okay, you don't need to fight that battle. So that's a very interesting sort of situation. Let's imagine that you're an intelligence analyst in that era. How quickly do you need to sort of come out with your analysis? If I don't get it out today, tomorrow's probably good. In fact, next week it'd probably be fine. In fact, a couple of weeks from now it'd be fine. Just don't know when that boat's going to get here. So we have this elongated sort of policy cycle, or elongated from our point of view. For them, it was sort of normal. And so in Iraq, we've had an example where we learned, or we had some intelligence, that there were some bad guys in a restaurant, and 15 minutes later, bombs were dropping. So we go from a policy cycle that's, 4 to 6 weeks long, down to something that's like 15 minutes long. So we're in a very different world. Next slide. So we're in a world where the number of policy decisions that are made per unit of time is increasing exponentially. During the Cold War, and even up to today, we at the CIA, as analysts, we get information on a daily basis. If something is really striking, let's say on Tuesday, I get a report that's really striking, and I say, there are policymakers downtown that need to know this. I will spend the day, Tuesday, sort of thinking about it, especially if it comes in the afternoon. The next morning, I'll say, we really ought to write this up and send it downtown. So we spend the day on Wednesday writing it up, editing it, re-editing it, coordinating it, making sure it's right. It gets into a book, and then on Thursday morning it goes downtown. So what is that? That paradigm is a yesterday's news tomorrow paradigm, right? And that was sort of okay, in Andrew Jackson's time. It was okay during the Cold War. It's not okay now. right? So how do we break out of that cycle? That's the question I'm sort of asking myself, right? Next slide. So during the 90s, a number of theoretical frameworks came together. There was, fractal theory and chaos theory, and a number of these sort of came together and produced something that we now call complexity theory. And complexity theory is essentially as follows, that there are these local relationships. Like in a forest, a bird has a relationship with a plant. It likes to eat the seeds. And what does the bird do? The bird's just looking for food, right? And the plant just wants its seeds spread around. And so the plant and the bird are just sort of maximizing their own local benefit. Bloggers, right? So there is this, the blogosphere sort of emerges out of all of these blogs and all this talking, and if you sort of come in at the top, you actually do get, set up your RSS feeds right, you do get some really brilliant ideas every day, right? But it's distilled from the millions of people blogging about nonsense. But in the nonsense bubbles up, and the blogosphere is actually pretty powerful. It has changed the course of elections in this country. But it's not one person, it's the collective, and it just responds, sort of magically. And the same thing is with the wiki, right? The wiki is a bunch of people, again, writing, but in a collective way, and it can change and adapt very quickly to news, and you don't have to wait. You don't have to take yesterday's news and publish it tomorrow. And next slide. And so we have put up something we call the Intellipedia, as well as blogs. And my colleague Sean will tell us a little bit more about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Calvin. Sean, you've been called the Intellipedia evangelist. Can you explain the thinking behind the development of the Intellipedia? Obviously based on some of the concepts that Alvin just mentioned, and how the platform has evolved over the past several years. I'm particularly interested in what challenges did you encounter with this new world within the agency and the intelligence community, and what other projects are on the horizon?
Okay. Thanks, Jim, and thanks again for the invite. I think I'd like to start actually with that term evangelist. I'm not quite sure if my management's really comfortable with me using that term evangelist, but that's really what I've become over the last several years, because when we talk about Intellipedia, and I'm going to mention, CIA did not create Intellipedia. It often gets reported incorrectly in the media, and you have two CIA officers here talking about Intellipedia, but actually the servers were actually created somewhere else, and I'll talk a little bit about that. When Cal wrote his paper and came and spoke to a group of analysts, we all thought he was crazy, including myself. I mean, he's talking about birds and rainforests, and how does this really apply to, I'm looking at Iraq or I'm looking at North Korea, how does this affect what we're doing? But then again, we didn't really know much about what was going on in the blogosphere. We didn't, and myself particularly, I actually went out to Wikipedia and started looking at the discussion pages in Wikipedia and seeing all this kind of vibrant discussion, debate back and forth about what's your source for this and why do you believe this, and you go, no, that's not neutral point of view, it has to get removed. And I said, wow, a lot of this debate is happening, what we do in the intelligence community day in and day out. And the other thing that really I thought was powerful about the wiki and about Wikipedia is that little history tab where you could click on the history tab and look back to see what was said about this issue back in 2002 when Wikipedia was first kind of up and running. And at the time, I was an analyst looking at Iraq, and what do you think we were being asked in the intelligence community in 2005? Well, what did you say about Iraq WMD in 2002? And what did you say about the insurgency in 2003? And so we would end up having to kind of pull people offline, to cull through all of our databases, just like the Colonel mentioned, to try and pull all of that knowledge that we had, and then send it down to whoever was making these requests for the reports. And I said, wow, if in an alternate universe where everyone's kind of contributing to this wiki, that we don't have to pull people offline. That's 2 mouse clicks away. We can just be able to see what we knew at that stage in time. So in 2000, so then I went back to Cal and said, Cal, okay, now I understand what you were talking about when you were talking about birds and rainforests, and let's get this thing up and running. And how do we do this? Now Cal's in the CIA's IT department at the time. You think this would be a no-brainer, just set it up and let's get it running. But we actually went to the one office that really had the charter of delivering these tools to the community, and that office is a small office called Intellipedia. And they, when we went to talk to them, they're pretty smart folks up there, and they said, Cal, Sean, we're already looking into this. We already hired a person, Chris Muselik, who will be the sysadmin for Intellipedia, and he's actually trying to set the servers up right now. So, so in that office, Intellipedia ended up getting subsumed into the DNI, or the Director of National Intelligence, when it was stood up in 2005. So really, that office now falls under DNI, but I would actually posit that sometimes even DNI doesn't recognize the jewel that they have with Intellipedia, because they've not only deployed Intellipedia, but they've deployed blogs, they've deployed a tagging service, they've deployed a service to upload documents, a web-based, an iVideo capability, a YouTube-like capability, and they've deployed all these tools basically on a shoestring budget. And but that gets back to the heart of why am I here? Because is Intellipedia really the servers and the software, or is it the people that are contributing to Intellipedia? And that's where I come in. I was actually when I met with Intellipedia, I said, okay, I'll be the pilot customer for it. I'll kind of help kick the tires on it. And we've really kind of, over the past several years, the pilot stage was in 2005. It was officially announced in 2006, in April of 2006, out to the community. And from that point to where we are here in 2009, it's been a struggle. As you mentioned, it's a lot of cultural issues that we have to encounter with the bringing in this kind of open source ethos into the intelligence community. And I'm kind of reminded of the quote of Gandhi's quote about first they ignore you, then they ridicule you or laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. Well, we've definitely had the first three stages of that. We've definitely been ignored, we've been laughed at, we've been, and on occasion we've been fought, and we haven't won yet. We're still kind of in this early adopter stage. We haven't really incorporated it like the military has incorporated into their day-to-day operations. I think some people have, but there's still a lot of other folks that are kind of sitting on the fence, and or just kind of, for example, the ignore portion. Initially we were ignored, which was fine, because when you really look at the development of the internet in its early days was ignored. And that actually helped the internet's growth, because what happened was you had all these geeks on the internet that basically set the culture of how the internet would run, this kind of culture of openness and sharing. And that's what we were able to do with Intellipedia, is that we were able to set the culture of Intellipedia and the blogosphere and how we were going to use this to accomplish our work. Because inevitably, every person, the first question they ask is, okay, how do I lock down a page? Or how can I lock down a page so only my 5 colleagues and I can access that? And we say, go somewhere else. Go send another email, because this is different. You're going to have to, and that's going to undercut the power of these tools if we start introducing locks into a culture that's already somewhat risk averse. We've had people ridicule it. We've actually had people kind of go through Intellipedia in the early days, kind of taking notes down on which pages were wrong, and then sending it up to their chain of command. And so who's in the right there and who's in the wrong? The person that actually knows the pages are wrong but doesn't actually go in and change them. And so that's a kind of philosophical debate that we could have. And then we've also had people fight us as well. So I can kind of allude to that later on in our discussion. So that's really where we are right now.
Great, thanks, Sean. I'm going to throw some questions back at the panelists, and then later on we're going to encourage the audience to participate. When we talk about Web 2.0, it has a lot of connotations and denotations and means different things to different people. How would you define Web 2.0 tools that relates to the military and to the intelligence community? Because sometimes the general population and the millennials and digital natives have different perceptions of what Web 2.0 is versus somebody that's known as a digital immigrant, somebody that wasn't born in and has been doing this literally since day one. So if you could elaborate on that part. Anyone can jump in.
Well, actually, I'd like to kind of take the opposite viewpoint of that, because that's actually what we've seen with Intellipedia and with the adoption of Intellipedia. I mean, perhaps we just recruit different people than the Army recruits, but we've actually seen a lot of the adoption of Intellipedia hasn't necessarily been from the millennials or the net generation. In fact, I mean, you really look at it, Facebook and a lot of these concepts are relatively new. They've only been around for 5 years or whatever. So that generation that's grown up just in Facebook or in using these tools day in and day out hasn't hit our workforce yet. They're about to. Next several years, they're going to hit our workforce. But when you really look at it, the number of contributors that are in the high ranks of number of edits, and the people like myself and Cal and other people across the community that have become evangelists and have tried to get their organizations into using this, they typically have a fair amount of seniority. They've been around the block a couple times. They've seen kind of tools come and go, and they see that this is a potential tool that is a game changer. And basically, they see, especially the folks that have been through, like Cal and I, have been through different offices. And every time you change office, you lose access to some of the data. You lose access to some of those notebooks that the Colonel was talking about. And as if you're reborn, you don't exist anymore. And now they look at these tools such as Intellipedia and blogs, and, well, now I as a CIA officer, one of the big initiatives in the intelligence community is make us more joint and be able to kind of move from CIA to NRO, National Reconnaissance Office, to NGA, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, all these things, and be able to just become more of a community and less a community of agencies. And now with Intellipedia and with blogs and these tools provided by Intellink, that data doesn't have to go away. It's not locked, if I change an agency, go from one agency to the other, I lose all my email. But I won't lose any of my blog posts. I won't lose any of the information I've contributed to Intellipedia. So a lot of the folks that have been around the block end up being the people that contribute the most. And then if you look at the other side of the coin, the young people that are coming into the intelligence community, what is their #1 goal when they join the community? Or not even the community. Any young person joining an organization, what is the #1 goal? To fit in. And they're not necessarily going to rock the boat. People don't join an organization thinking, how can I radically change this organization? It just doesn't happen. So we pair them up with a person who's grew up in an intelligence community without Intellipedia, without wikis and blogs, and that person is the one that ends up discounting it and says, don't bother with that. What you need to focus on is production. You need to get, you need to produce some of these reports, and that's all kind of nonsense. So, and so what do the people do? They just kind of fall in line. They don't want to rock the boat. There's a few people out there that will challenge that, but those are few and far between.
I kind of look at it a little in line with what you're saying, but let me take it from a military perspective. I mean, I live in between two kind of generations right now, and I think you can go like this with the generations. In general, the more senior you are, and the farther you are away from living in the environments, not only on the ground, but the type of the Web 2.0 environment. The more hesitation there is in terms of adopting these ideas, and you see it reflected in policy, you see it reflected in general statements. I kind of live in general in what I call the tweener generation. In '96, I was in Bosnia for a year, and I came back at the end of '96, and to me, the internet just kind of exploded onto the scene. Within a year, I was seeing, billboards with something.com, and it's always been new to me. It's always been, how am I going to use this to create advantage? How do you create leverage out of the capabilities that are out there, and kind of have a new set of eyes on? And there's probably a 10-year generation in there that lives in this world that really kind of surprised and wants to grab onto it. And then there is the bulk of the Army, which are somewhere below the age of 28, that do not know anything different than this type of world, that demand the capabilities that they use on an everyday environment. And they demand it, and they're vocal about it, especially when it comes to the loss of a buddy or the failure of a mission. So there are different perspectives, and it is always a challenge to connect the bottom.
They sort of asked me, how can we use a wiki to get our message out? So they are thinking 1.0, right, broadcast. They want to get their message out. I said, why don't you put up a draft policy and let the wiki people write it for you? You could just sort of see them, go into shock. So they heard the word Web 2.0, but didn't really understand that it was an interactive thing, that it's a group of people working together, right? And no, you didn't understand our question. How can we use the wiki to get our message out? And I said, no, you didn't hear my answer. The wiki is for a group authorship. It's not a broadcast, and that's the big difference between 1 and 2.
Thanks, Calvin. It's interesting to note that the Army recently promulgated or reiterated guidance that they're going to allow certain social networking sites and web-based email systems to the folks at the bases. So they'll have access to things like Facebook and to Twitter and to Flickr and things of that nature. So one of the key themes I heard out of the last one is, how does a traditional management structure in the military or the intelligence community built on a hierarchical setup of command and control deal with today's situation, and how do you win them over with a bottom-up approach, with the wisdom of the masses solving problems on the tactical edge to save lives? So what are the strategies, if you will, that have worked well with their traditional command and control structure with this new collaborative authorship of wikis?
Well, I think we have espoused a kind of bottom-up, and that's actually what it's called, from the bottom up, a grassroots approach to the adoption of Intellipedia, and for several reasons. We've actually, when we first started off, we were like, geez, if only the D&I would come down and just say everyone's got to have an Intellipedia, user page, and everyone's going to start contributing their knowledge to Intellipedia or start up a blog and be able to, put out their thoughts out there. And that's how we were at the beginning, and we've come out 180 degrees since, because what we've actually seen that fail. On the Wikipedia article on Intellipedia talks about how we were going to write a national intelligence estimate, an NIE on Nigeria, using Intellipedia. It failed miserably because it was forced from the top down. We're going to use this, and what happened, I was actually participating in some of those initial meetings, and everyone around the table was looking for excuses on, how can I not participate in this? Oh, our information is too sensitive, we can't play. And then if the people who didn't have the sensitive information didn't have that excuse, they actually went off and found other excuses. We actually had people consulting lawyers within the building to see if they could actually get Intellipedia as a whole turned off. Not just so they couldn't participate, so anybody couldn't participate. So it kind of shows you the lengths that people will go to avoid changing their day-to-day work practices. So instead, we actually take this bottom-up approach of reaching out to people and say, okay, where are you capturing your knowledge? Are you capturing it in a Word document, on a shared drive, or are you having these discussions back and forth, like the Colonel mentioned, in email, and all that knowledge is trapped in that channel of email? Well, why don't you take that information and post it out to a blog? Or why don't you take that information and put it out on a wiki so the broad audience it can benefit from that and can build upon it? And so it's a challenge to our culture, because we grew up in this kind of need-to-know culture, and now we have this, we need a balance between need to know and need to share. And it's basically, I kind of call it trying to implement these tools in the intelligence community is basically like telling people that their parents raised them wrong, because they knew no other way. It was, well, I got to play everything close to the vest, and well, Cal's on my team, so I'm going to share this information with Cal, but you know, Pat's in the military. You know, those military guys, they just throw things all over the place, so I can't share it with Pat. So and so that's that culture that we grew up in, and we're actually trying to reverse that culture and just say, let's look at this whole corpus of information and what can we share at the broadest audience, and then what's the information that we have to kind of, where are the crown jewels that we need to protect, and let's protect those and make those, you know, very hard to get to, or leave breadcrumbs that kind of lead. You know, you start at the broadest audience of Intellipedia, and then, okay, here's what we know at the broadest audience about Iran's nuclear program, but obviously there's some sensitive data that we can't put out on Intellipedia. Well, for that information, contact John, or here's a link that links into another portal that has only the sensitive information, not and capture that sensitive information there. But it is a huge cultural challenge.
If I can comment,
Sure.
I think your comment on challenged culture is exactly what we're dealing with in the military right now, because it is a very rigid hierarchy for a reason. And the traditional way we have always looked at military operations is command and control, and there's one guy in command. But what we're realizing in a complex battlefield today is that you know, where before all the information kind of funneled up, the information and data has to funnel down right now, and the commander is no longer the smartest guy in the room, and he has to tap into the resident knowledge of the subordinates. So collaboration as a form of command is something that's been kind of circulating right now as an idea, that you are leveraging the experience of your subordinates, because we have been doing this for 8 years, to be able to create a desired effect. Along the same note, you talk about new social media, and the military's initial aversion to that is probably a result of not only policies that are antiquated, but you know, political repercussions of a post gone bad. You know, as a military organization, we've almost got to look. We are training ourselves to look differently at media operations and new social media type entities that are out there, because in some ways we're getting beat by the fact that we're not telling our own story, and it has an effect at the tactical level. When your adversary does not have to tell his story in terms of the truth, and you are in a battle to be reactive to it rather than proactive to it. So we're really wrestling with that.
We talked about Web 2.0 in terms of how it's used internally to organizations. But now I want to sort of reach outside of that in terms of recruiting and retaining folks that may be interested in a career in national security or with the Army or with the military. How do you see the Web 2.0 playing a role to get the messages out to folks that may be interested in joining respective organizations? And secondly, with the nation-state building now in the Army Field Manual being on par with what's called kinetic delivery, meaning weapons. Nation-state building requires you to reach out to many different entities, both within the U.S. and in foreign government organizations. So sort of a twofold question. One, starting off with, how do you attract the next generation, if you will? And two, with global problems and issues with nation-state building, how do you see Web 2.0 playing into that new world where these millennials may already have friends and connections in those countries that they met first on Facebook or MySpace or what have you?
I guess I'll take that. The first part of your question is recruiting. I will say right now we do not have a big problem with recruiting today. And it has something to do with the economy, but it's not something that we need to sit on our laurels about. I mean, our engagement in Web 2.0 as a mechanism to connect is real. We are using it on a daily basis. whether it's Facebook, whether it's simulations in gaming, whether it's use of the web itself in terms of information and blogs, because that is where our customer base is at. I mean, if you don't meet them there, you're never going to connect with them. And the other part of it is I think that we have to realize is the customers that we are looking for, the soldiers we're looking to recruit, we have got to put in their mind the value of being in the military. You know, that it's not just about deploying someplace. It's not about wearing the uniform, but what is it that they will get out of it? What will they be able to take out of the experience of being in the military for a certain number of years? In looking at the recent manual that came out, Stability Operations, our conversion as a military from solely focused on offense and defensive tasks to stability tasks, and realizing under these stability tasks you work in a joint and interagency, a multinational environment where you work every day with people that are not like you. As a Brigade S3 in Iraq for 15 months, I sat next to a provincial reconstruction team leader who was from the Department of State, and it was a collaboration, unified action to move our area of operations forward. Web 2.0, I think, has great implications in terms of being able to break down cultural barriers, because I saw everyday cultural barriers between the different departments, and be able to create an atmosphere where a common medium allows for a desired effect to be achieved in the battlefield. And I guess the one example I have, or the one methodology we use, and again, this is a brigade level, I'm all the way down at the lowest level, is we used, and I guess I could say that SharePoint within our brigade as a collaborative tool, and we were dispersed across an area the size of Rhode Island, where all of our provincial reconstruction team members had the same access as our battalion commanders, S3s, and they were able to rapidly collaborate to a defined solution to discrete problem sets rather rapidly, using the web as a method.
I think our mere presence on this panel actually talks about how CIA views this is a good news story. I mean, how often do you really see CIA employees actually out engaging in these types of panels or with the media? And that's our Public Affairs Office views this as a good news story. I mean, I've talked about some of the struggles with Intellipedia, but getting this out to the out in front of young people to say, hey, they're using wikis and blogs, they have a YouTube-like capability there in the intelligence community, that's going to attract users, and people are going to look at the CIA and the members of the intelligence community as someone that as organizations that are 21st century organizations. Cal actually has a great quote that he talks about where individuals can choose whether or not they want to use Web 2.0, but organizations have to adopt these tools, otherwise they will become irrelevant.
One thing I missed on that you reminded me of is the power of the web for reach back. Because you are not going to be able to get all the elements of national power in your tactical operations center. You're not going to be able to get the expert from the Department of X. So, the web gives the ability to reach back and for them to provide context to the area of operations you're working into. And again, that's a tactical level view, but it has huge implications.
Great. Well, I'd like to ask the audience, if you have some questions, to step up to the mics that we have around. You can either ask a general question to the entire panel or direct it to any one of our panelists. So highly encourage that if you have some questions. I also have some more questions here. So if someone from the audience would like to ask a question, please, again, step up to the mic and introduce yourself. And
how are you? My name is Greg Bateman, and I've got a question for the Colonel there. Following DoD as I do, I know that General Cartwright, the Vice Chief, is very big on the notion of wikis and blogs. And you know, one of the things that I see in my own business is that adoption by the leadership, something I do as a manager of a team, of, you know, the wikis and blogs is something that's critical. Are you seeing that in Army, both at the tactical level and elsewhere? Or could we have hopes that McChrystal, you know, heading off to Afghanistan now, having sat close to Cartwright for a number of years, might try to get that culture started in Afghanistan?
The short answer is yes and no. The reality is I wouldn't have been able to do what I did unless I had the support of senior leadership of the Army. In the case of Cabinet, it was then Major General Peter Corelli, who's now the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, who understood as that kind of top generation the power of the capability. There are other instances I've seen out there where there is an aversion, but the movement is directly in line with what you're talking about, with a senior leader advocacy towards these new technologies and using them to create advantage. It's a vehicle, not the solution. It's a vehicle to create advantage.
Dov Markowitz with actually CTIA, so Wireless Trade Organization, so which ties into, actually I have two questions. First, generally, what's been the impact for all of you with mobile technology as far as being able to add and create information? And then secondly, how do you generally avoid getting lost in the noise? I mean, particularly with both situations, you're talking about a tremendous flood of information. And beyond the idea of sort of searching in a sort of a text fashion, how do you see, or you know, how is it now, or how do you see it shaping up as far as being able to search more dynamically to sort of be able to synthesize information that you come across?
In my particular case with Tiger, that was what your second part of your question was. It was the hardest thing to solve. Is when you have reservoirs and reservoirs of data and information, how do you, as I term it, slice and dice through it to get to exactly what you need? And DARPA spent an incredible amount of time and effort looking at search capability, advanced search capability, to really give that squad leader, you know, in his little box of the world itself, all the information and data in the way he wanted to see it, of the connected people, places, and things in time and space that allows him to do the analysis he needs. You hit on what I think is, you know, one of the problems that is going to continue to plague us as more and more ingestion or data sources start to grow, and we're just seeing this extrapolate over time.
On the mobile issue. Mobile sort of implies wireless, and when we think about our business, and we operate with classified information, and we're trying to get classified information to people who can use that information. When the information goes over a wire, it goes to a desktop that's sitting in a room that's behind guards with guns and barbed wire and locks, and shielding and a number of other things. And so we're pretty confident that the person sort of that's tethered to the wire in that room, that the information that sort of comes off the screen is protected. When we say, okay, now let's send it to somebody's BlackBerry, right? We do actually have confidence that we can send it securely, but that person is walking around in a place that's not behind guards with guns or barbed wire or shielding. They're sort of out there. And so when the information sort of comes off the screen, it's then in the open. And it's the last 10 inches, right, problem that we haven't solved yet. And if any of you would like to use your 20% time to solve that for us, we'd love to talk to you. But the last 10 inches is just a real killer.
We're dealing with this in a big way with the fielding of some of our new technologies across the Army. And I'll put it to you this way. I think in some ways we are creating a policy-driven digital divide at the very lowest tactical level in defining what can and can't be shown to our team leaders and our squad leaders right now. And sometimes it doesn't quite meet the common sense test. Okay, I ride around in a Humvee or an MRAP or a tank in downtown Baghdad. There is one guy on that particular vehicle that has a clearance, but everyone can see the digital display that's designed for the commander of that vehicle. Okay, and they better look at it because they better know what I need to know, what I know if I get taken out as that leader. So there is some policy decisions that need to be readdressed that look at how we display wireless data in all forms.
I'd like to just take a stab at that second part of your question about noise and data overload. David Weinberger, author of Everything is Miscellaneous, talks about the solution to data overload is more data. It's kind of contrarian to think that way, but if the colonel writes a report, okay, you wrote a report, that's great. But if Cal blogs that report and Jim tags that report using some type of tagging tool, now the relevance of that report is raised. And so that's what we're trying to encourage people to do with these tools, is that this actually can help us with kind of that data overload problem. And the other thing I would mention is a lot of these tools are very efficient in the way they store data. We actually, for the 3rd anniversary of Intellipedia, we actually had a challenge out to the community to make, we typically average about 4,000 edits a day. We had a challenge out to the community, let's make 15,000 edits in a single day. And we achieved that goal, but then when somebody actually went and looked at the back end of what all those edits amounted to, all those contributions, it was 3 floppy disks. So it was really, I mean, it's really efficient in how it handles information. So.
Hi, Dan O'Connor with CCIA. The panel was fascinating, and you guys really showed how you took a dynamic, new bottom-up technology and concept and moved it to organizations where that might have been a challenging idea to the structure. So I kind of wanted to shift focus a little bit in the national security Web 2.0 space and see if you guys have any thoughts on one of the current big political issues at the time, which is securing our critical infrastructure. And cybersecurity legislation has been moving. When the government and government decision makers see a problem, they tend, especially in the national security space, they tend to employ a command and control top-down approach to securing things. And oftentimes to secure the internet and hardware and software, especially if you apply this top-down standards to architecture of software and hardware, it can create more problems sometimes than it solves, backdoors, things like that. So I was wondering if you guys had any ideas on how to use dynamic Web 2.0 type technology and notions to actively do a better job securing things like our critical infrastructure.
Well, that may be beyond parameters of our panel here.
I've got ideas, but I'm not smart enough.
So let me just say one. I don't have a really good answer for you, but it gives me an opportunity just to talk. So let me, let me take the podium. In the Middle Ages and earlier, when people felt threatened, they built walls around their cities, right? They built fortresses. And so then eventually gunpowder and cannons came along and could shoot down the walls, right? So then they were sort of in this dilemma, all right, now the walls don't protect us, now the fortress doesn't protect us. How do we protect ourselves as a city when we can't hide behind the wall? And so even today our cities are open, right? Anybody can sort of walk into a city anywhere in the world. And so we figured out ways to protect ourselves, and part of that was then cities had to band together into alliances, and they formed countries, and even the borders are permeable. invented sort of large standing armies to protect the whole area, things like that. So I don't know if that's a good analogy or not, but if we have a website and we have a really, a fortress-like firewall around it, right? And what we see are the Chinese are breaking through those all the time. The Chinese invented the gunpowder, and now they're inventing, break through the Cisco firewalls, right? And so there may have to be a paradigm shift, just like when, the cannons took down Constantinople. That was an incredible paradigm shift for the whole Western world. And we may have to think about this sort of a whole new paradigm, which I don't have yet. Again, 20% time, you guys can solve this problem for us.
We'll take one more question, please.
Hi, my name is Ryan Polich. I'm with America's Impact. We're a network of progressive foreign policy professionals. And we're trying to build something similar, Web 2.0, so this is very interesting to me. And my question for you guys is, getting back to the data of what you're gathering, is whether you have, if you can differentiate for me between the quantitative data that you're getting, when an IED, the size of it, et cetera, and the qualitative, in terms of maybe morale within a particular unit, or more anthropological data about a country or a location, something like that.
The distinction between information and data and knowledge is what I think you're talking about. Information and data put in context equals knowledge. And actionable knowledge to me is something that I can use for the next patrol. For the longest time, our military has been focused on information and data. In fact, we can do massive simulations based on information and data. If I take out this platoon of tanks here, what are the second, third order effects? What we haven't been able to do is to model and simulate is the impact of personality, mass populations, second, third order effects of influencing people, places, and things in terms of a network. But we have been working very hard towards that. I mean, we fielded human terrain systems, human terrain teams, anthropologists with a team around them all across Afghanistan and Iraq right now to specifically take the information and data we have out there, look at it through a series of multidimensional lenses, and create quality that helps commanders make decisions in time and space. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I know it's something we're wrestling with all the time.
So I think we're wrestling with it too. I mean, I think, and that's what the Colonel talks about data. We have a lot of information, we have a lot of data, but how do we get to the knowledge? And really, when you start looking at knowledge, it's how is knowledge built? It's really a social phenomenon, and Web 2.0 is, another term for Web 2.0 is social media. So the ability to kind of capture that knowledge using these tools, every time I make a contribution to a blog or a wiki, that's forever tied to my user ID, and if you're going to implement it in your organization, I would strongly recommend that it be tied to that person's name, because your name is your reputation in the community, whether it be in the intelligence community or in your company or whether it be in the military. So now I'm making a tie to that nugget of information that I put out there, and then we can build upon those links, and that knowledge can build over time.
Great, thank you. I want to thank our panelists, Colonel Michaelis, Calvin, and Sean, and the audience and the folks that are participating in Google Moderator for today's session. Hopefully it was an eye-opening experience in terms of learning just how Web 2.0 is impacting national security and the armed services like the Army. So we want to thank you as well. We'll be hanging out afterwards. And if you have any questions, the panelists will be hanging around for a few minutes if you want to come up and ask them a question in a